Ever get that feeling that the amazing technologies we keep hearing about, the ones promising to revolutionize everything, um, maybe deliver the goods for a select few while the rest of us are kind of still waiting for the upgrade?
Oh, absolutely. It's like being promised a jetpack but still stuck in traffic, right?
Exactly. And that feeling, it's pretty much what we're diving into today.
Yeah, we're going deep. Forget the surface level hype. We're looking hard at power and progress. Our thousand-year struggle over technology and prosperity by Duran Esamoglu and Simon Johnson.
hmm Think of this as like your personal decoder ring for understanding why these huge technological leaps haven't always meant a better life for everyone.
It's a fantastic book, really packed with history and some incredibly sharp insights.
So our mission today, and you've already signed up just by listening, is to unpack the core arguments, those aha moments that help make sense of, well, everything around us.
Without making your brain feel like it's running on dial-up.
Right. We're exploring their central idea, this constant battle over how tech shapes not just the total amount of wealth, but crucially, who actually gets to enjoy it.
It's definitely not that simple story of a rising tide lifting all boats.
Huh.
Not at all.
So settle in, maybe grab a coffee. We are going on quite a journey. And while you're at it, please like, subscribe, and share. So we can keep bringing important content to your feed. We're fighting an uphill battle amidst the ocean of slop and echo chambers.
Okay, let's kick things off in a pretty unexpected place. Not some gleaming tech campus, We start with a factory blueprint.
A blueprint, okay, intriguing.
The book introduces the Panopticon. Now, you hear that, you probably picture what? A creepy circular prison? Guards in the middle, seeing everyone?
Totally. Yeah, the classic image of constant unseen surveillance gives you the shivers just thinking about it.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. Before it was a prison concept, it was actually designed as a factory.
No way, a factory.
Yes, by Samuel Bentham, Jeremy Bentham's brother, the famous philosopher. Samuel's idea was all about efficiency, right? Maximizing how many workers just a few supervisors could watch.
Okay, so efficiency makes sense in a factory context, I guess.
And Jeremy Bentham, well, he saw its potential everywhere, schools, hospitals, you name it. He even wrote about it being useful for manufactories, prisons, and even hospitals.
Right, control and efficiency. That seems to be the theme.
That was the sales pitch, yeah. But the book digs deeper, highlighting a darker side. This early factory surveillance. It wasn't just about boosting output.
What else was it about then?
It was about getting workers to work harder, put in more effort, without needing to pay them more.
Wow. Okay, hold on. So the actual design of the workplace was meant to squeeze more labor out for the same pay?
That's the argument. You see how that idea of maximizing output through surveillance, avoiding higher wages, kind of echoes today. Think about worker monitoring software, algorithmic management.
Yeah, you definitely see parallels. It's like history rhyming, but with algorithms. So did every factory then become this literal panopticon tower?
Not literally, no. The specific circular design wasn't widely adopted, but the principle behind it. Organizing work for relentless supervision. That spread like wildfire in late 18th century Britain.
How did that play out in practice?
Well, take textile manufacturing. Complex weaving skills got broken down. Simplified, repetitive tasks done by machines.
And who operated these machines?
They hired unskilled workers, often women and children actually, working these monotonous jobs for incredibly long hours, sometimes up to 14 hours a day.
14 hours? That's brutal.
Brutal, and constantly watched to ensure maximum output, minimal slacking.
I can't even imagine. And the pay must have been terrible.
Rock bottom wages. And the book really stresses that the workers knew things were worse. They understood their hours had increased dramatically, their living conditions were deteriorating in these new factories, and the awful, crowded cities growing around them.
So right from the start of the factory system, you had this tension. Tech drives production up, but the workers doing the work. Not necessarily seeing the benefit.
Exactly, that tension.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to the book's argument.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. It's so easy to think of technology as this inherently positive, unstoppable force, right? But the book really throws a wrench in that narrative with some pretty stark examples.
It absolutely does. They talk about the double-edged sword of innovation, a really important concept. Take the cotton gin.
Yeah.
Revolutionary, right? Massively boosted cotton production, made the American South a global powerhouse. Sounds like a clear win.
Yeah, on the surface, totally. More efficiency, bigger profits, more exports, the whole deal.
But then you pull back the curtain.
Yeah.
The book reveals this horrifying consequence. The cotton gin didn't just boost cotton, it intensified the brutality of slavery. It fueled its expansion across the South.
Oh, wow, because cotton became so profitable.
Exactly. It created an even greater demand for enslaved labor to pick it. So this huge technological leap forward in economic terms was directly, tragically tied to immense and escalating human suffering. It's a real gut punch reminder about unintended consequences.
Chilling. Absolutely chilling. Are there other examples like that, where tech had this dark flip side?
Another really stark one is Fritz Haber's work on artificial fertilizers around the turn of the 20th century.
Oh, yeah, the Haber-Bosch process. Huge for agriculture, right? Feeding the world.
An enormous breakthrough. Increased crop yields massively, helped feed a growing population. Seems like an unequivocal good for humanity.
But there's the other edge of the sword.
Tragically, yes. Haber and others used those same chemical principles to develop chemical weapons. Mustard gas, chlorine gas, deployed with devastating effect in World War I.
God, leading to just unimaginable suffering.
Hundreds of thousands killed or maimed in agony. So the same scientific brilliance that could nourish life could also be turned with horrifying efficiency towards mass destruction.
And they bring it closer to home, too, with modern computers. I mean, how can computers be anything but good?
Well, again, it's complex. Computers have fueled incredible progress, no doubt. But the book points out how the immense wealth generated, it's become super concentrated.
In the hands of, like, entrepreneurs, investors.
Exactly. A relatively small group. Meanwhile, a huge chunk of the population, particularly in the U.S., folks without a college education, they've seen their real incomes stagnate or even fall over the last few decades.
Even with all this amazing computing power supposedly boosting the economy.
Right. So even a technology that seems universally beneficial, like computers, hasn't automatically meant broadly shared prosperity. It really challenges that simple idea that tech progress lifts everyone up.
It really dismantles that narrative, which I guess brings us to those early economic worries about tech and what the authors call the productivity bandwagon myth. What's that about?
Yeah, this is fascinating. Some of the biggest names in economics were grappling with this early on. David Ricardo, a foundational figure. Initially, he was optimistic, thought tech would steadily improve workers' lives.
Okay, standard classical economics view, maybe?
He even told the House of Commons in 1819 that machinery did not lessen the demand for labor. Famous last words, almost.
Uh-oh, he changed his mind.
Dramatically. By 1821, he added a whole new chapter to his big book, Principles of Political Economy, called On Machinery. He basically confessed he'd been wrong.
Really? What did he worry about?
He started to seriously fear that machines could actually eliminate the need for human workers entirely. He wrote in a letter, "If machinery could do all the work that labor now does, there would be no demand for labor." Pretty stark.
Wow. So even back then, early 1800s, these anxieties about tech replacing jobs were real.
Very real. And it wasn't just Ricardo. Fast forward to the Great Depression, John Maynard Keynes. He also worried about technological unemployment.
The idea that tech advances faster than we can create new jobs?
Exactly that fear, that we'd automate faster than we could adapt.
But hang on, didn't we kind of get through that? Like the post-World War II era, the 50s and 60s, that felt like a time of pretty widespread prosperity, didn't it? Tech seemed to be working for most people then.
That's a crucial point the book makes. There was that period, the 50s and 60s, where workers did benefit significantly from productivity growth alongside businesses. Wages went up, living standards improved broadly.
So what changed? Because now it feels very different. We have amazing tech, but also soaring inequality, stagnant wages for many.
Precisely the contrast the book draws. Today, despite incredible tech leaps, we see this huge rise in inequality. Many wage earners feel left behind. And it's not just a U.S. thing.
Right, they mention other developed nations too.
Yeah, even places with stronger safety nets, better worker protections, Scandinavia, Canada, France, they still face rising inequality and a shortage of good jobs for people without college degrees. Maybe not the same wage declines as some in the U.S., but the trend is there.
So that whole idea that increased productivity just automatically makes everyone richer, that's the myth.
That's the productivity bandwagon myth, in a nutshell. The book argues forcefully that we just cannot assume that. History shows it's way more complicated. Which leads us to power dynamics. It's not just about pure efficiency.
Okay, let's unpack that. Power dynamics. So it's not just about who invents the coolest, cheapest gadget.
Not at all. The authors talk about employers sometimes sharing rents.
Rents, like profits beyond what they absolutely need to stay afloat.
Exactly. And they might share them for various reasons, maybe to build goodwill, Maybe to motivate workers, maybe just because social norms at the time kind of expect it.
Any examples?
The classic one is Henry Ford and his $5 a day minimum wage back in 1914. That wasn't just generosity.
Right, it was a business decision too, wasn't it? To reduce turnover on those brutal assembly lines.
Absolutely. Cut down on absenteeism, keep workers from quitting, maybe even head off labor unrest. So decisions about wages and conditions aren't always just about squeezing every last penny of immediate profit.
Okay, so there's more to it than just pure bottom line thinking sometimes. And this connects to the direction technology itself takes.
Precisely. The path of tech progress isn't inevitable. It's shaped by the visions, the priorities of powerful people, often tech leaders, big investors, influential figures.
And the book is critical of the current dominant vision.
Very critical. They argue the current vision is heavily skewed towards automation, surveillance, and mass data collection. And they contend this path, while maybe enriching a few, actually undermines shared prosperity.
How so?
By weakening workers' bargaining power, potentially weakening democratic institutions too, and concentrating wealth and power in fewer hands. It makes you question whose vision of the future we're actually building.
That sounds pretty concerning. And they connect this modern vision back to earlier history, right? Like the Industrial Revolution.
Definitely. Chapter 6, Casualties of Progress, goes deep into how the first Industrial Revolution impoverished and disempowered many.
So it wasn't just an unfortunate side effect.
They argue it was largely a direct result of an automation bias, prioritizing tech that replaced skilled workers and a serious lack of worker voice. No say in the tech being developed, no real power in negotiating wages or conditions.
And it wasn't just about money, right? Health and autonomy suffered too.
Hugely. People's health declined, their sense of control over their own lives diminished in those harsh factory environments. It was a step backward in many ways for a lot of people.
But things did eventually start to change later in the 19th century.
Yes, slowly. And crucially, the book argues this change happened because ordinary people organized. They demanded reforms, both economic and political.
So collective action made a difference.
A huge difference. These social and political shifts started to influence the direction of technology and put upward pressure on wages. But, and this is important, the authors stress it wasn't some final victory. It was limited. And the struggle for shared prosperity is long and ongoing. Progress isn't automatic. It has to be fought for.
Which brings us neatly to the digital age and these ideas of the artificial struggle and the illusion of AI. That sounds very current.
Right into our moment. Chapter 9 argues that the post-1980s vision that focused on automation, data surveillance, has really shaped how AI is being developed.
And the result?
They argue it's actually making economic inequality worse. Despite all the hype from tech leaders about AI's universal benefits, the book suggests its actual usefulness for most human tasks is, well, surprisingly limited right now.
Limited. That flies in the face of so much we hear. AI will change everything.
Exactly. The authors point to AI being used for things like workplace monitoring, which boosts inequality and disempowers workers. And they worry the current path could even reverse economic gains in the developing world through global automation.
Oof. That's a heavy concern.
But here's the critical bit. They insist this path isn't predetermined. It's not inevitable. It reflects specific choices, choices that primarily benefit a relatively small, powerful group.
So the way we're doing AI now isn't the only way.
Not at all. They make a key distinction between pursuing machine intelligence, trying to build human-like thinking machines, and what they call machine usefulness.
Machine usefulness, what does that mean?
It means focusing on tech that genuinely complements and augments what humans can do. Makes us more productive, more creative, helps us solve problems rather than just trying to replace us.
Like tools rather than replacements.
Precisely. They argue many past digital successes actually focused on machine usefulness, but that approach is getting sidelined now in the big push for full automation via AI. It's a vital distinction to keep in mind.
It feels like we're so obsessed with building, I don't know, Skynet, that we're missing how tech could actually make our lives better right now.
That's a good way to put it. And this ties into the power of persuasion, how certain dominant visions catch on and shape what society decides to do.
Okay, the power of persuasion. How does that work in practice? They use the Panama Canal story, right?
Yeah, Ferdinand de Lesseps.
Yeah.
Famous for the Suez Canal, right?
Yeah.
Hero engineer.
But then Panama, that was a disaster, wasn't it?
A colossal disaster. Engineering miscalculations, disease, horrific death toll. But Lesseps had this incredibly powerful vision. Big engineering projects, canals linking oceans, bringing prosperity for all. finance it by private markets.
Sounds noble enough on the surface.
But the book argues he was also incredibly resistant to evidence that contradicted his vision, very focused on European priorities, and often disregarded the well-being of non-Europeans.
So why did so many people buy into his Panama vision, given the risks and eventual failure?
That's the core question. The answer, according to the book, is social power. Lessep's remarkable ability to persuade vast numbers of small investors to back this incredibly risky dream.
So it wasn't just the technical merits, it was his influence.
His influence, his charisma, his reputation from Suez, his relentless self-promotion. He could command attention, convince people, even when things were clearly going wrong. The authors quote Carl Deutsch here, defining power as the ability to talk instead of listen, the ability to afford not to learn.
Ouch, that rings true sometimes.
And Edward Bernays' unsettling line about how our thoughts and tastes are molded by people we've never heard of. Lessep's had that kind of persuasive power.
They contrast his power with someone like Napoleon.
Yeah, Napoleon's power was more political, military, prestige-based. Lessep's was more social and economic persuasion. And they link this to modern examples like the too-big-to-fail narrative after the 2008 financial crisis. Persuasive arguments, even debatable ones, shaped massive policy decisions.
It makes you really question that whole marketplace of ideas concept, the idea that the best ideas just naturally win out.
The book throws cold water on that. Definitely. They quote Richard Dawkins on how bad but catchy ideas can spread like wildfire. And there's that rich gets richer thing with ideas. The more you hear something, the more plausible it feels, regardless of truth.
So truth doesn't always win.
Acceptance depends heavily on the existing power structure. Whose voice gets amplified? Who has the institutions, the authority, the status to counter objections? If you lack power, your brilliant idea might just fade away.
It's like ideas are fighting in an arena, but some fighters have way better armor and weapons from the start.
Exactly. And psychological studies show how hard it is to ignore information, even if you know it's unreliable. We're wired to respect status, imitate success. These create feedback loops, reinforcing the persuasion power of the already powerful.
So for an idea to really take hold, especially a big one, it needs more than just merit.
It often needs to be framed in a way that seems to transcend the narrow self-interest of the people pushing it. If it just looks like a power grab or a get-rich-quick scheme, it's less likely to fly.
They use the example of Reconstruction in the U.S. South after the Civil War, right? How a certain narrative won out.
A really powerful and deeply tragic example. Black Americans made huge strides towards equality during Reconstruction, but then came redemption.
When the Democrat Party effectively reversed that progress.
Yes, they persuaded much of the nation to accept the reimposition of Jim Crow laws and disenfranchisement. Black Americans, despite their clear interests and desires, lacked the political power and the persuasive clout to shape the national narrative effectively.
So the dominant racist narrative prevailed, even against the interests of a whole group of people.
Tragically, yes. Progress was undone because the power to persuade and coerce lay elsewhere. It's a stark reminder of how easily justice can be subverted when power is unequal.
It really is chilling, which leads to that famous quote about power corrupting.
Lord Acton, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The book applies this not just to political authority, but also to persuasion power.
How so?
The powerful often convince themselves their ideas are the most important. They rationalize, ignoring or suppressing other perspectives, like Lessep's rationalizing the awful conditions in Egypt and Panama. He likely believed his grand vision justified the costs.
So ultimately, who gets to set the agenda? Whose voices are heard? Whose are ignored? That's the crucial battleground for how technology impacts us.
Exactly. That's why the authors argue for diversity of voices. It's essential for building countervailing powers against these potentially overconfident, self-serving visions. Because persuasion power creates these self-reinforcing cycles, concentrating more economic and political resources, making it harder for alternatives to emerge.
Okay, so this struggle isn't new. It didn't start with computers. The book looks way back in history too, right?
Absolutely. They give examples from medieval times, like water mills increased productivity, sure, but also gave feudal lords more power to coerce peasants, extract more value, without necessarily making the peasants' lives better.
And the pyramids in Egypt.
Stark contrast. The elite overseeing construction lived relatively well. The peasants doing the brutal labor, poor health, short lives, and key choices, like focusing on grain monoculture in Egypt, weren't inevitable. They were specific decisions with huge social consequences.
What about the English enclosures? That seems like a big one.
Huge. Privatizing common lands? It could boost agricultural efficiency, arguably, but it also dispossessed masses of poor peasants who relied on those commons.
Creating a cheaper labor force for landowners and emerging industries.
That's a key part of the argument. Even Arthur Young, initially a big proponent of enclosures, later recognized the terrible impact on the rural poor. It shows how progress for some can mean loss for others.
And they draw that grim parallel between U.S. cotton expansion, built on slavery,
And Soviet agricultural collectivization. Vastly different systems, obviously.
but similar outcomes in some ways. Rapid growth in output, but at a horrific human cost.
Exactly. Slavery-fueled U.S. cotton. Forced collectivization and mechanization boosted Soviet agriculture, but led to famine, destroyed livelihoods for millions. The theme is consistent. Productivity gains throughout history often didn't translate to better well-being for most, and were often achieved through exploitation and coercion.
And for centuries before the Industrial Revolution, overall growth per person was basically flat.
Near zero per capita GDP growth for vast stretches of history. Tech progress happened, but didn't automatically lead to widespread prosperity. That's a crucial historical baseline.
So, the British Industrial Revolution, it wasn't just a sudden burst of genius inventions changing everything for the better.
Far from it. The book highlights figures like George Stephenson, the railway pioneer, a practical, visionary inventor who challenged the social hierarchy. His success with railways, winning the Rainhill trials, showed practical demonstration beating established thinking.
But Britain's advantage wasn't just having guys like Stephenson or having rivers and coal.
No. The authors argue many early industrial technologies were explicitly designed to replace skilled artisans with machines and cheaper unskilled labor. That's what sparked the Luddite riots. And Britain's agricultural productivity wasn't even exceptionally high compared to elsewhere in Europe.
So what was the key difference for Britain? Why there? Why then?
They argue it was a long, slow process of social change. It created a nation of upstarts, a large, ambitious middle class, eager to rise through business and technology.
So the rigid old social hierarchy had loosened enough.
Exactly. By the mid-19th century, there was more social mobility, more opportunity for entrepreneurship. That dynamic social structure, more than just inventions, was the crucial catalyst. It's about the context, not just the tech.
But even with these ambitious upstarts, the human cost for workers in that early period was just staggering, wasn't it?
The book paints a brutal picture. Quotes from the time are damning. Horace Greeley saying muscular force was a drug in the market. Engels calling workers mere chattel, like property.
And the official investigations,
Yeah.
like into mines.
Horrifying. The Royal Commission findings revealed young children working incredibly long hours in lethal conditions. Factory work was grueling 14-hour days, harsh discipline, frequent, horrific accidents with little or no compensation.
Just disposable labor, essentially.
Low wages, terrible conditions. It was a direct result of the massive power imbalance between employers and unorganized workers. And don't forget the environmental cost. London's deadly coal fogs, infectious diseases rampant in overcrowded industrial cities. Public health plummeted.
A truly bleak era. But somehow, things started to improve eventually. How did that happen?
Paradoxically, the factories themselves played a role. Bringing workers together, even in hardship, fostered communication, shared ideas, the beginnings of collective action.
So, organizations started to emerge from the factories.
Yes. The book mentions the Chartist movement in Britain, demanding political rights, universal male suffrage, ending property requirements for MPs aiming for a fairer society.
And there were reformers working on other fronts, too.
Absolutely. People like Edwin Chadwick, investigating the awful sanitary conditions in cities, pushing for reforms like proper sewers, which eventually reduced disease dramatically. Public health started to become a focus.
They contrast this with India under British rule, using the railways example.
Right. A technology that could have spurred modernization in India was instead used mainly to serve British economic interests and tighten colonial control. It didn't boost local industry much and became an instrument of extraction and control.
So the progress that did happen in Western nations wasn't guaranteed. It had to be fought for against powerful interests.
Exactly. It was contingent, difficult, and faced constant opposition from those benefiting from the status quo. Progress required struggle.
Okay, let's cross the Atlantic again. The U.S. saw electrifying growth later on. How did the American system differ?
The U.S. grew incredibly fast between, say, 1870 and 1913, fueled by new tech. But they also faced inequality and worker displacement, maybe even more acutely initially because of the huge agricultural workforce being disrupted.
But their technological path was different from early Britain.
Somewhat, yes. There was more emphasis on raising productivity to make better use of relatively scarcer labor. Think interchangeable parts, Eli Whitney and others, simplifying production so less skilled workers could be efficient.
And innovation was booming, loss of patents.
An explosion of patents, yeah. A real focus on practical invention. The American system had two key pillars, mass production and a systems approach, integrating engineering, design, labor, machinery,
Leading to lower costs, higher output.
and generating new demand in other sectors, creating new kinds of jobs, engineers, managers, sales clerks, administrators.
And education played a role?
Crucially, the expansion of public high schools provided the skills needed for these new white-collar jobs.
Then you have Henry Ford and the Model T, the ultimate example.
Classic example, mass production vision, enabled by tech advances and that revolutionary factory organization at Highland Park Interchangeable Parts, moving assembly line.
And Ford's insight about paying workers enough to buy the cars.
Yeah, his recognition that productivity creates purchasing power. His higher wage policies were partly about that, alongside reducing turnover. Though GM later surpassed Ford with more flexible production, catering to diverse tastes.
So the contrast is between early British industrialists focused purely on cost-cutting for profit.
And the American system, where profit was still key, but the technological path created different, arguably more broadly beneficial labor implications, at least initially. Different choices, different outcomes.
Fascinating. Which then leads to the Nordic choices. How did countries like Sweden forge a path towards more shared prosperity, especially after the shock of the Great Depression?
Well, Sweden's response was quite different from the US or France. The Social Democrats, SAP, took a path of democratic reform, building broad coalitions, urban workers, rural workers, middle class, and moving away from Marxism.
Towards a more collaborative model.
Exactly. They developed a corporatist model. Strong, centralized trade unions became key players, negotiating directly with employers and the government, building the welfare state.
And this led to less inequality.
Significantly less. Sweden went from being quite unequal to much more equal, alongside rapid growth in jobs and productivity. It shows the power of institutions and strong worker voices in shaping how tech benefits are shared.
And this idea of linkages comes back, mass production creating related jobs.
Yes, like cars spurring growth in steel, rubber, dealerships, repairs, etc. The book highlights the post-World War II secret sauce in the US and elsewhere. Tech creating new tasks for various skill levels, plus institutions allowing workers to share productivity gains.
They use the example of containerization on the docks.
Right. Longshoremen. The powerful West Coast Union, ILWU, under Harry Bridges negotiated deals that managed the transition retraining, job security shaping how automation hit them. It shows worker power mattered.
So during those post-war decades, automation's displacement effects were balanced by new job creation.
Largely, yes, resulting in a stable labor share of income and broadly shared wage growth. Plus, the expansion of social insurance programs provided more security. It was possible to have tech progress and shared prosperity under the right conditions.
But that era ended. Things shifted around 1980, coinciding with the rise of digital tech. What went wrong?
That's the core puzzle of our time. That post-World War II period was unique. Since roughly 1980, we've seen wage growth slow for most, labor's share of national income fall sharply, and inequality surge.
And the book argues a key reason was a change in the direction of technology, towards automation.
Yes, a much stronger focus on automation, replacing labor rather than augmenting it. This shift disadvantaged labor relative to capital. You see the wage gap explode between those with advanced degrees and those with high school or less. Income shifted from labor to capital.
And again, not just a U.S. problem, though maybe worse there.
Trends are global, though less severe in some places. Other factors like offshoring and China trade played a role, sure. But the book argues the automation focus and the decline in rent sharing by employers had a more fundamental, widespread impact.
This economic shift also happened alongside a shift in ideology, a resurgence of pro-business thinking.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Starting in the 70s, business became much more politically organized and active. Think Powell Memo, Business Roundtable, pushing for deregulation, lower taxes, weaker unions.
The idea that government was holding business back.
That narrative gained a lot of traction. Reaganomics, Thatcherism, the productivity bandwagon idea got extended into trickle-down economics. Thinkers like Hayek, championing free markets and criticizing government intervention, became very influential.
And shareholder value became the main goal.
The shareholder value doctrine really took hold. Maximizing returns for shareholders became the prime directive for corporations, often leading to prioritizing short-term profits, cost-cutting over long-term investment, or worker well-being.
Corporations got bigger, more dominant, less antitrust concern.
Yes, more concentration of market power. Skeptical views on antitrust gained ground. And U.S. unions weakened significantly due to various factors, creating a more adversarial labor relations climate than in, say, Nordic countries.
And re-engineering and office automation took off.
Big time. Aimed at reducing labor needs. Though, interestingly, the book notes countries like Germany and Japan often took a different path, combining automation with creating new tasks and retraining workers trying to retain their workforce.
So the U.S. approach was more focused on pure replacement.
Arguably, yes. Plus, government R&D funding shifted, often supporting corporate priorities more directly. And then there's the Solow paradox, the observation by Robert Solow, questioning the fruits of the late 80s digital revolution. Computers everywhere, but productivity growth was sluggish for a long time.
Even Tesla had issues with too much automation initially.
Right. Elon Musk eventually admitted humans were underrated. The book distinguishes routine tasks, easily automated, from non-routine ones needing human skills, creativity, complex problem-solving, social intelligence.
And current AI, still mostly focused on narrow tasks.
Mostly narrow task automation via machine learning, not true AGI. It struggles with common sense, adaptability, causality. Prone to overfitting, especially in dynamic social situations.
So a lot of current automation is just so-so, replacing workers without huge productivity gains.
That's the concern raised, driven maybe more by hype or cost-cutting desire than real economic benefit, or creating better product services.
Which brings us back full circle to the modern panopticon, digital surveillance in the workplace.
Exactly. Worker monitoring isn't new, but digital tools and AI have intensified it massively. Keystroke logging, location tracking, algorithmic management, making decisions about schedules, performance.
Sounds incredibly stressful and dehumanizing.
Potential for huge stress, loss of autonomy, even unsafe conditions if algorithms push people too hard. Plus, these techs enable the gig economy, zero-hour contracts, precarious work lacking benefits and security.
And the global implications, exacerbating inequality between nations.
Big concern. Current AI favors capital and high skills, scarce in developing countries. It could increase skill requirements for production, lead to deindustrialization there, widening the global gap.
It feels like a technologically advanced version of those early factories, but with surveillance the Benthams could only dream of.
A chilling thought. But the book doesn't end there. It offers hope, a road not taken.
A more human-centered approach. What does that look like?
Think Norbert Wiener, cybernetics pioneer. He envisioned human-machine partnership, augmentation, not replacement. He warned against treating humans as means to an end.
And machine usefulness, like the early Apple Mac.
Exactly. Tech designed to be intuitive, empowering, collaborative. Human-centered design principles. Usability, learnability, safety, efficiency, user satisfaction.
So the current path towards full automation is a choice, not destiny.
That's the core message. We chose this path, and it has consequences. We can choose differently.
But there's another big shadow, the erosion of democracy in the digital age.
A massive urgent issue. Early internet optimism about democratization has faded fast.
How are digital tools being used against democracy?
Authoritarian regimes use them for censorship, surveillance, repression. China's Great Firewall, social credit, Xinjiang surveillance, spyware like Pegasus targets journalists, activists. Snowden revealed mass government data collection.
And tech companies haven't always helped.
Many have prioritized complying with censorship demands over free expression principles.
Plus, social media's role in polarization.
Huge problem. Deplatforming dissident voices and points of view, creating fact-checking algorithms during elections and the pandemic, creating echo chambers. The business model often incentivizes engagement with sensational, divisive content.
Algorithms amplifying the problem.
Algorithmic amplification contributes to filter bubbles. The book argues the tech world's approach is often technocratic, viewing political discourse as something to manage or manipulate, not protect. It's harder to control than old radio propaganda due to decentralization and algorithms.
They draw parallels to the original robber barons and the progressive era pushback.
Yes, suggesting we might need a similar societal response now to regulate today's dominant tech platforms and protect democracy.
So if we want to redirect technology towards shared prosperity and stronger democracy, what can we actually do? It's not hopeless.
Definitely not hopeless. The future isn't written. Think of the AIDS crisis activism and advocacy force change led to breakthroughs.
So we need to remake countervailing powers.
Exactly. Empower labor stronger unions, new forms of worker organization, foster and engage citizenry via civil society groups, reform corporate governance beyond just shareholder value, promote competition, regulate dominant platforms effectively, strengthen safety nets.
Any specific policy ideas?
Taxing automation, subsidizing labor, government R&D focused on human complementary tech, education, healthcare, revisiting Section 230 for platform accountability. Wealth taxes. They're a bit skeptical of UBI alone, preferring targeted measures and creating real opportunities.
So the path remains unwritten. Our choices matter.
That's the powerful concluding message. We are not passive victims of technology. We have agency. Our choices shape the future.
It's a really vital argument. Technology's impact isn't automatic. It depends on power, choices, and whether we build forces to push for fairness. Understanding this is key to being, well, truly informed.
Absolutely. It helps you see behind the headlines and the hype.
So here's a final thought, something for everyone listening to really chew on after this deep dive. What specific kinds of technologies do you think would most benefit society as a whole?
And maybe even more critical, what role can we all play as individuals in our communities, in the political process, to actively shape technology's future? How do we nudge it towards shared prosperity, inclusion, and a healthier democracy?
Powerful questions indeed. We really hope this discussion gave you some valuable food for thought. We definitely encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, maybe even grab the book itself, Power and Progress. It's a crucial read for understanding our times.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive today.